Hello, little listeners, and welcome to 123 Baby You and Me. Today's story is Little Blacknose, the story of a pioneer, written by Hildegarde Hoyt Swift. It is the true and honest story of the DeWitt Clinton engine and all that he saw and did. Now, let's meet Little Blacknose. Chapter 1. What am I? Clang, 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 up and over and down, up and over and down, great hammers went swinging, falling with a ringing noise on long bars of iron stretched out on huge anvils. Ah, swish, shush. With a noise like the hiss of 1,000 snakes, a furnace door opened, and out came a running stream of fire. Stupid things, thought Blacknose. How can they get around on those long, thin stalks? I'm glad I have wheels. 4 good, round, sensible wheels. Go? Of course I can go. Joe is right. Why won't they let me go, instead of keeping me shut up here in this? Ah, Joe was coming back now, carrying a great load of fresh wood in his arms. Well, old fire-eater, I'll just get up a little steam in your boiler and we'll see again whether you work or not. Poor old iron horse, just rearing to get away, I'll bet. But you'll have to wait till David Matthew comes. David's the boy to fetch you. Iron horse? Iron horse? So that's what he was, a horse. But from where he stood in his corner, Blacknose could look out of one of the foundry windows and see the horses going up and down Beach Street outside. This was New York City in the spring of 1831, and horses were everywhere. Horses went on thin stalks like men. They didn't go on wheels. How could he be a horse when he went on wheels? Well, anyway, he was a wonder, and Joe was giving him some wood to eat at last. Soon David would come to take him away. Away, away! He didn't care where. He didn't care where. Phew! The fire in his firebox was getting very hot. Was he really getting up steam? Shush, 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 and shush to go, and shush, shush to go. He tried saying it over and over to himself. Oh, how excited he was getting! Who was that standing down there, looking at him now? It was another man in a tall hat, but somehow he looked different from the men who had come before. Nicer, perhaps. He looked like a visitor, yet he seemed at home in the foundry. Joe had shut the firebox door with a bang the minute he caught sight of him, and had jumped right down to speak to the newcomer. Why, Mr. Matthew, we've been expecting you for days. What do you think of your locomotive? Mr. Matthew, his man. Locomotive, so that was his name. Locomotive. He was a locomotive, and David Matthew had come for him at last. Chapter 2. Albany, Albany. When the little locomotive, or the little iron horse, or whatever he was, finally poked his long black smokestack into the light of day and left forever the clang-clang of his foundry birthplace, it was a lovely day in June. The birds were singing, and the sun was shining down on bright green grass. Children were rollicking under tall, shady elm trees, playing and running over the grass. Old New York was a jolly village in those days. When the children rolled their balls into the streets, they ran quickly to fetch them. No monster cars came rushing by to make it dangerous. No skyscrapers shut out the light. No roar of traffic hurt the ears. At first, little Blacknose was very happy. Free, free, free! He thought. I shall run as the children do. I shall roll my wheels round and round. I shall go like the wind. 30 miles an hour, Joe said. What does that mean? Never mind. I shall go 30 miles an hour. But what was this? Why were they fastening chains to his front? Why were they pushing and pulling him up a big plane of wood and onto a great cart to which 4 of the thin-stalked horse creatures were tied? Now the horse creatures were pulling him along the street, and crowds of people were running after him and shouting. The wheels of the cart were turning round and round, but his own wheels were stiff and still. "It's an insult," he thought, "an insult. Shall I never go by myself? Shall I never be really free?" They took him down to the end of a wharf. Here was another wide plain of wood, built especially for his use. They pushed and pulled and jollied him up this plain of wood and over the end of it into one of the big Hudson River steamers. It was hard work getting him onto the boat, for he weighed as much as 40 fat men, or one big elephant. But soon he was safely aboard. "Well, what now?" he thought. "Hooray!" cried the men from the foundry who had helped to haul him. "Goodbye!" called David Matthew. "Goodbye, good luck," called the foundry men. Blacknose heard the great boat engine begin to throb. He saw two big wheels, one on each side of the boat, begin to turn, at first slowly, and then faster and faster. The water came spraying up over them, silver and shining in the sunlight. The wharf where they had just been grew smaller and smaller. They were off and away. Now, a first boat ride is always a very exciting event. Of course, a locomotive couldn't run into the very tiniest point of the bow to feel the wind in its face, or back to the stern to watch the great widening, splashy wake the boat makes. It couldn't dash down to the engine room to watch the engine work and talk to the firemen, or run back to eat a delightful, though strange, kind of lunch out of a paper box. A locomotive couldn't do those things. But Blacknose had only been aboard for a few minutes, when he had a much more interesting experience than any child could have had. He was listening and looking around, trying to ignore the crowds of curious people who were always staring at him, when he suddenly realized that the boat's engine was talking to him. "Well, how do you do, brother of the steam? I am proud to be carrying you up the Hudson. I hear my firemen talking about you. They say that you, too, will run on great wheels as I do, but that you will run over the land as I run over the water. They say you will change the land as I have changed the water. They say you are wonderful and will soon be very great and famous as I am. They tell me you were born in the West Point foundry where I was made, so you are really my brother. Were we not born in the same house? Welcome, brother of the steam, and may good fortune attend you." When Blacknose understood this message from the throbbing of the boat's engine, he was greatly pleased and excited. He longed to answer and express his thanks, but he couldn't. He had been built without a bell or whistle, and because his steam wasn't up, he couldn't speak at all. He tried to creak a little, but that wouldn't work in the least. He was too well built. So he had to content himself with silence. By this time, they had gone a long way up the Hudson and had left New York City far behind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That was as far as New York could count in those days. Now it counts its streets way up into the hundreds, and it adds and multiplies streets very quickly too. Then, there was only a barn where the tallest skyscraper now stands. Almost all of great, famous, busy Broadway, with its theatres, gay signs, and dazzling lights, was a thin, muddy, crooked country road. At West Point, Blacknose noticed something that interested him. It was a stone wall with long, round objects, something like his own smokestack, sticking out of it. The ship's engine politely explained that they were guns, placed there to guard the river against enemy ships. "Oh yes," thought the locomotive. "I do believe they used to make those things in the foundry where I was born, but no one ever told me what they were before." When the boat's engine began talking about enemy ships, Blacknose grew a little nervous. "Will any of them attack us?" he wanted to ask. Of course he couldn't. However, he looked very carefully at all the boats they passed and studied their different flags. There were very few steamboats like the one he was aboard, but the river was full of ships, schooners, sloops, clipper ships, and all kinds of sailing and fishing vessels, little and big. Just as he was wondering and worrying, he noticed another great steamboat that seemed to be trying to draw alongside theirs. It was travelling very fast and was plainly trying to overtake them. The people aboard were shouting and waving and seemed greatly excited. At first, Blacknose was terribly afraid, but there were no long, black, round objects sticking out of the new boat's side. It couldn't be coming to attack them. What did it want? Two boys standing near the little locomotive began jumping up and down and shrieking with excitement. "A race! A race! Hurrah! Hurrah! I bet on us!" A race, so that was what it was. But just what was a race? "Toot, toot, toot! I'm coming to catch you!" shrieked the new boat's whistle. Then, did he dream it? Or was his own boat going faster and faster through the water? Yes, it was leaping ahead. The water rushed past in a streak of white on either side. Now he heard the engine gasping. Oh dear, they shan't catch me. I'm the fastest boat on the river, never been passed. Oh dear, I can't keep this up. I shall burst my boiler. Oh, oh, oh! The boat leaped forward. The whistle shrilled a cry of triumph. Woo! 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 You can't catch us now! Yes, the other boat was far behind. Blacknose was very excited and happy. He wanted to tell the boat's engine how proud he was of him. He longed to call out, "Hurrah for the West Point foundry!" But of course he couldn't. His steam wasn't up. After the race, things seemed to grow rather dull. Blacknose was tired. It took 15 whole hours to travel up the Hudson to Albany in those days, and that was a long trip for a little locomotive. This is just as bad as the foundry after all. I can't use my wheels here any more than I could there. Oh, I'm tired of staying still all the time. Will they never let me go free? Just then, he heard the ship's engine saying, "Now we're coming to Albany, Albany, Albany!" It seemed to be true, for soon there was a great hurry and bustle aboard the ship, people rushing, children shouting, and other people on shore rushing and shouting to meet them. They took Blacknose off the boat, down a tilted plane of wood like the one up which he had been moved before. Then they carried him through the streets of Albany on a truck. Albany in those days was rather like a jolly village too, just as New York was. Only a few thousand people lived there then, all told, but it seemed to the poor little locomotive that at least 1 million had come out of their homes and were chasing at his wheels. Everywhere he went, a crowd gathered, dashed after him, and shrieked and shouted all kinds of things about him and at him. There was so much confusion and noise that he understood very little of what was said. That was a good thing, because it wasn't all nice or pleasant by any means. They carried him to the end of a lane called Lydia Street. Here, for the first time in his life, he saw 2 shining rails running up a hill on what looked like a road made of wood. When he saw the place, he had a funny feeling all through his pipes and boiler. He knew, though he didn't know how he knew, that this was the track that would fit his wheels. It was the very track for which his wheels had been made. Here, he would win success and glory, or failure and the scrap heap. Oh, he hoped with all his pipes that it would be glory. He was feeling glad and thrilled, excited and a little frightened, when he had one of the most unpleasant experiences of his life. An old roan horse, a horrible, hardened, insolent sort of horse, walked straight up and insulted him. This was not an iron horse. It was a common, cart-pulling kind of horse. "You," said the horse. Yes, he walked right up to Little Blacknose and snorted at him. Then, perhaps because Blacknose was so quiet, or perhaps because his long black smokestack and big wheels looked rather terrible, the horse suddenly whirled around on his hind hooves and galloped away. But at a distance of 10 yards or so, he turned, looked at the locomotive and snorted again. Then he came walking slowly back. He walked all around Blacknose, making a horrid, sneering whistle through his nostrils. When he had gone all the way around, he stopped in front of him. He stuck his long, ugly, reddish-yellow nose toward the little engine's smokestack and flicked his upper lip back over his teeth, which is a way mean horses have when they are about to be very unpleasant. "You horrid brute," said the horse. Blacknose didn't answer. Of course, we know that he couldn't, not yet. But his boiler began to grow warm, even though there was no fire in his firebox. "You great, ugly, useless beast," said the horse. Now Blacknose was angry, really angry. He was even angrier because the people standing nearby began to laugh and seemed to be enjoying the horse's rudeness. "If I ever have a chance to get even with you, you horrid old horse," the poor little engine thought. "I've heard enough about you," continued the horse, with all the rudest kinds of snorts, sniffles, and whinnies, "to upset a dozen grocery carts, and I've heard nothing good. They say you're an iron horse, a horse indeed. You look more like a circus camel, with that great ugly hump in the middle of you. Go back to the circus. That's where you belong. You're a horror. They say you will take the work away from us. Will you eat our oats for us too? You call me homely, you hideous, red, thin-stalked thing," the little engine cried to himself. "For years and years, rain or shine, we've pulled the coaches over this railroad," the old horse raved. "Yes, and gone fast too. How fast can you go? Do you think you could ever catch us? Not you. Iron can't beat horseflesh. Why don't you answer me, you ugly hulk? Can't you even hear?" "I'll answer you when my steam is up," thought the locomotive. "So I can't run as fast as you can? We'll just see about that. When my steam is up, I'll put the fear of death into you backwoods horses." But the little engine could only think all this as yet. He seemed to stand silent and cold and make no sound. Of course, the old horse thought he had won the argument. With indescribable haughtiness, he turned on his back legs and went off to tell all his brothers in harness how he had visited the iron stranger and promptly put him in his place. As he went, he snorted lightly over his shoulder at Little Blacknose. "Humph! I guess that settles you, you great black camel thing. You just wait and see," thought Little Blacknose. Chapter 3. The Shining Rails. Perhaps it was just as well for Blacknose that the roan horse walked up and insulted him on his very first day in Albany. The strange crowds and mysterious shining track had made him feel shy and uncertain. He wasn't sure that his wheels would turn. He wasn't sure that his boiler wouldn't burst. He wasn't sure of anything. Until the ugly horse talked to him. Somehow that unpleasant conversation gave him strength and courage. His back was up now, and it was an iron back at that. "I'll show everyone," he thought. "I'm a wonder, a wonder, a wonder." He said it fiercely and firmly over and over. The more he said it, the more certain he became that it was true. But he needed all his courage the very next day, when a large gang of men came and fastened chains to his front. What in the world are these chains for? He wondered. He knew something strange and exciting was about to happen, but he didn't know what. And that is difficult for anyone, even a little iron horse. The chains stretched up the hill ahead of him, following the shining track. Up, up, up. At the top of the hill, though Blacknose couldn't see it yet, was a funny kind of engine. It ran by steam, but it had to stay in the same place all the time. A great big spool was part of it. The steam made the spool turn round and round, winding the chains tighter and tighter, just as a child winds string around a top to make it spin. Up, up, up the chains pulled Blacknose. Slowly, slowly, his wheels began to turn. Slowly, slowly, he was dragged up the hill. Oh dear, are they always going to lead me around by the nose this way? I don't like it. At last, he reached the top of the hill. Far ahead, first side by side and then narrowing into one thin ribbon of silver, stretched the shining rails. The gang of men rushed at Blacknose again and unfastened the chains from his front. Thank goodness, he thought. They brought up a tender filled with wood. People call them coal cars now, but this was a wood car. They fastened it tightly behind him. Wood! Now I shall have something to eat, thought the poor, hungry little engine. Then David Matthew appeared. He climbed onto the back of Blacknose, opened the firebox door, and threw chunk after chunk of wood into the engine's hungry, yawning mouth. It was a wide and useful mouth, even though it was behind his nose instead of beneath it, like most people's. Come, old fellow, we'll see what you can do, David said as he built the fire. No more puttering around with chains for you. Either I'll take you to Schenectady this very day, or you'll blow up and take me to Gallyhooska. One or the other, sure as fate. The men placed 2 large barrels of water on the tender. Then they gave Blacknose a great long drink until his boiler was full of cool, refreshing water. But it didn't stay cool for long. It grew warmer and warmer and warmer. Shh, shh. The steam was coming, creeping, creeping. Now it was rushing through all his pipes and veins. Choo, choo, choo! Oh, hurrah, hurrah! He could talk! He could talk! He had found his steam at last! When Blacknose first came slowly over the edge of the hill, he had been surprised to see the engine pulling him. It looked rather like him, though it didn't have any wheels. Now that Blacknose had found his steam, he politely thanked the engine that couldn't move for pulling him. He hadn't enjoyed it at all, but he thought it was better to be polite. Save me a lot of trouble, he said, pretending he could have done it all himself. Oh, don't mention it, the quiet engine answered. Were you born at the West Point foundry too? Blacknose asked, hoping he had found another friend. Oh dear, no. I came from England, the other engine answered. Somehow that seemed to end the conversation. Meanwhile, the water inside the little locomotive's boiler was becoming hotter and hotter. Oh, how the steam came rushing! Choo, choo, choo! He snorted and puffed. He looked at the shining rails and trembled with eagerness. He was wild to go. But would he go? Could he go? Could he run along the shining rails all by himself? Choo, choo, choo! Let me go! Let me go! Let me go! As if in answer, he felt his levers move. His 4 wheels began to turn. The crowd behind him shouted and cheered. He was off at last! Choo, choo, choo! Free, free, free! But his joyful puffing soon turned to fear. He was becoming horribly hot. Was he going to blow up? Was he going to burst, just as those horrid men had said? Faster, faster, faster! Now the trees and fields rushed past so quickly that they seemed like a blur to poor little Blacknose. He was horribly dizzy as well as horribly hot. Could he hold the track? Could he stand the heat? But the shining rails stretched peacefully ahead. Wherever they led, his wheels followed. Soon he grew accustomed to the heat and motion. Nothing dreadful happened, and his fear disappeared. Then he began to sing. Tadak, tadak, get off the track. T-double-Y ditty, T-double-Y ditty. Then he tried another rhythm. Schenectady, Schenectady, Schenectady. He repeated it happily, enjoying the sound very much. They had travelled this way for what seemed like forever, when Blacknose suddenly saw the roofs of a city shining in the distance. Schenectady, Schenectady, Can this be Schenectady? Just then, he heard David Matthew give a tremendous shout behind him.
1 more mile, old boy! 1 more mile! We've made it! We've made our run! 1 hour and 45 minutes! Hurrah!
Glory, glory, glory! Blacknose sang. Then he saw the very end of the track and slipped, proudly puffing, into the middle of a cheering, shouting crowd. The people rushed around him from every direction. They fairly yelled with excitement. When they saw David Matthew, they lifted him onto their shoulders and carried him around. What has he done to get carried? Blacknose thought. Haven't I carried him all the way? But Blacknose had no reason to be jealous. Everyone was very nice to him too, and he heard himself called a wonder many, many times. They gave him another delicious drink of water and a long rest. He probably slipped off to sleep, worn out by all the excitement, because he suddenly awoke with a jerk and discovered that they were feeding him chunks of wood again. Oh dear, oh dear. He would much rather sleep than eat. Couldn't a poor little engine finish his rest after he had travelled so far and done so well? Where in the world did they want him to go? Hadn't he reached the end of the track? Did they expect him to climb trees or jump over rooftops? What were they going to do with him? A great fear seized poor Blacknose. It quickly changed to terror when he suddenly felt his wheels beginning to move. What? It couldn't be true, but it was. He was beginning to go the wrong way. Horror, horror, horror! Blacknose was going backward. He couldn't see the track. He was sure he wouldn't know how to follow it. It was awful. Something dreadful was certain to happen. Oh, if only he had blown up and burst at once instead of waiting for some strange death to jump on him from behind. For mile after mile, little Blacknose slid backward, gasping, coughing and trembling, with great hot drops of fear standing all over his black boiler. But nothing dreadful happened. Nothing dreadful had happened the first time he was afraid either. Before long, he began to feel happier. Faster and faster he travelled. It was downhill all the way back to Albany. With every turn of his wheels, new courage came to him. He began to think things over. I suppose they wanted to return me to Albany, where I came from. There wasn't any way to turn me around in Schenectady, and, of course, I can travel either way just as well. Now he felt extremely pleased with himself and wasn't frightened one bit. He drew great, deep puffs of pride as he slid along. Why, I can go backward even better than forward. Of course he could. It was all downhill. I'd just like to see that old red horse try this. When he finally slipped, back end first, into the middle of the cheering crowd waiting for him in Albany, he was a very happy little engine. Oh, how the people shouted! Oh, how they called him big and wonderful names! Even the engine that couldn't move spoke to him. How do you do? I congratulate you. Blacknose hadn't the faintest idea what that meant, but it gave him a very nice feeling inside. He was a wonder. There was no doubt about that. His secret trial trip had gone well, and he had returned from Schenectady in only 35 minutes. What was everyone talking about now? Everyone was coming to see him. They were calling it an excursion. Well, let them bring on their excursion. He didn't care. He was going to be given a name. Well, he hoped it would be a nice one. Everyone would want to ride behind him. He overheard that too. I don't care, Blacknose thought. Let everyone in the world come. It will be the treat of their lives to see me. I shall never be afraid of a single thing again. I'm a wonder.
Chapter 4.
I just hope all those silly old red horses come too.
Excursion! Excursion!
Little Blacknose stood puffing, gasping, coughing and blowing off steam at the Albany end of his track. It was a hot day in August, August 9th, 1831. The sun poured down and his steam had been up for hours. He was terribly, desperately hot. Great crowds of people rushed, pushed, laughed, shrieked and milled around him. They were all looking at him. They were all talking about him. They all wanted to ride behind him. It was terrible.
What am I to do? Thought Blacknose. Where will they go? Will they ride me like a horse? Great drops of heat and horror stood all over his poor little black boiler. Excursion! 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 Make way for the former governor! Make way for Governor Yates! Make way for High Constable Hayes! The crowd moved aside for two men approaching Blacknose. One was tall and fat, the other was short and fat. Blacknose noticed that they had nicely rounded fronts, rather like his own boiler. One man held a bottle, the other carried a large wreath of flowers. He handed the wreath to David Matthew, who fastened it to the front of Little Blacknose. Then the other man climbed up and broke the bottle over the engine's back. I name you for the best governor New York State ever had. I name you DeWitt Clinton. The crowd roared and cheered louder than ever. This time, Little Blacknose didn't mind. He was greatly pleased. The cool liquid rolled down his hot sides and he liked it. They have given me something to make me handsome. They have given me a name, my own name. Now I am not just an iron horse. Now I am not just a locomotive. I am DeWitt Clinton. I am myself. I shall show them. I shall show them. Excursion! 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 A tall black man strode through the crowd, holding what looked like long strips of newspaper. This man is the right colour, thought Blacknose. I wonder if he was born in a foundry. I wonder why all men can't be that nicer shade, like mine. Crowds of people rushed toward the man, but he proudly waved them back. These tickets are already spoken for, he announced. Then Blacknose noticed a little boy holding the hand of a pleasant-looking man. The man wore the usual tall beaver hat and held a large brown cigar in his mouth. Blacknose looked at the hat. Then he looked at the cigar. Why doesn't the man's smoke come out of his smokestack? He wondered. The boy and his father hurried up to the ticket seller. Are you Marquis de Lafayette Williams? You have our tickets, I believe. We ordered them at the hotel in Albany. Are you Mr. Beers, and is this child Thomas Beers? Yes, sir. Then these are your tickets for sure. He strode onward, calling, Tickets! 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 Puffed little DeWitt. Whatever in the world are tickets for? Where can all these people ride? Choo, choo, choo! Not on my boiler. I do not choose to take them. Choo, choo, choo! I do not choose. As if in answer, there came a frightening bang. Something struck the poor little engine from behind so hard that he jumped forward along the track. He looked back and discovered that his wooden platform was being attached to him. It had 4 wheels and carried 2 large barrels filled with wood. It was the first tender, only it was a wood car instead of a coal car. Well, at least I shall have plenty to eat on this excursion, thought Blacknose. Then came another bang. Something large, bright and colourful was fastened by a loose chain to the tender. This was the first passenger car, but it didn't look much like a modern railroad car. It was a large wooden stagecoach on 4 wheels, like the coach's horses had previously pulled. A little flight of steps led into it. There were 2 long leather seats inside, where passengers sat facing one another. The outside was bright yellow with orange trim. There was room inside and outside for 17 people. 2 long bench-like seats sat on top, and those were perhaps the best seats of all. Little Tommy Beers certainly thought the seats on top were best. He clutched his ticket and cried to his father, "Oh, father, please let's sit on top! Let's sit on top! Oh, father, we must sit on top!" His father finally said yes. Up over the wheel and onto the roof Tommy climbed. The very first passenger to board the DeWitt Clinton train. Soon another Cinderella-like coach was fastened to the first, and then another, and another, and another. Little Blacknose now stood at the front of 1 tender and 5 coaches. He puffed and coughed, wondering how under the shining sun he could ever pull them all. I'm afraid I can't do this. I really am afraid I can't do this.
On his trial trips, Blacknose had never carried anyone except David Matthew. Now he was terribly worried. Then he suddenly saw his old enemy, the rude roan horse, standing in front of the crowd and laughing at him. Many other horses were nearby. Some were hitched to carts filled with vegetables, while others pulled stylish carriages. They all turned to listen when the old roan horse began laughing. "Ho, ho, ho, ho! You'll never pull that load. No, not you. It takes 5 horses to pull 5 coaches. Can one stupid, ugly iron beast do the work of 5? No, not you." "All aboard!" cried John T. Clark, the conductor. He climbed onto a little seat at the back of the tender and blew a mighty blast on a tin horn. The coaches were crowded with laughing and cheering passengers. "All aboard! All aboard! All aboard! Toot, toot, toot!" David Matthew fed fresh wood into DeWitt Clinton's hungry firebox. Then he pulled a lever. Little DeWitt shivered and strained. He pulled and struggled. "Choo, choo, choo! I'll go if I choose, choose, choose! Choo, choo!" Now he was directly beside the rude old horse. "Choo!" He coughed right beneath the horse's ugly nose. Whether it was the sudden noise, the strange sight of the train moving, or the horse's rage at little DeWitt's success, no one could say. But the haughty horse turned and ran, and ran, and ran. When the other horses saw him flee, they ran away too. Carts overturned, vegetables scattered everywhere, and surprised passengers tumbled from their carriages. "Ha ha ha! Go to grass, you silly old horses!" Little Blacknose laughed and laughed as he pulled his heavy burden faster and faster along the shining rails. Blacknose had travelled so fast and so far that he was becoming terribly thirsty. His water was almost gone. David Matthew knew his engine needed water. He applied the brake and slowed little DeWitt so he could stop for a long drink at a watering station beside the track. They had stopped there many times during the trial runs, and there had never been any trouble. But today, when Blacknose tried to stop, something struck him terribly hard from behind. Bang! Crash! Crash! He heard wood splintering. Then he heard a man scream, "Tommy!" How strange to hear a grown man scream. Blacknose felt David Matthew jump down from behind him. He knew something dreadful had happened. What had he done? Was the little boy hurt? The nice little boy who wanted to sit on top? Had he hurt Tommy? No one would ever trust him again. No one would ever ride behind him again. Blacknose tried to look back along his boiler, but he couldn't see. Great hot tears of steam filled his eyes. Oh, what should he do? What should he do? Then David Matthew and John T. Clark climbed back aboard. David gave Blacknose a nice long drink of cool, refreshing water. To Blacknose's surprise, David was laughing. Just like a child, not to hold on tightly. Falling on his head seems to have done him good. He never turned a hair. Conductor Clark laughed and answered, "Those poor ladies were bounced around. Funny that we never realized the loose chains would let the coaches crash together when we stopped. Now we've placed solid pieces of wood between them. All will be well." Yes, everything was well. Little Blacknose started onward again. On again, on again, on again. Schenectady, Schenectady, Schenectady. Then he tried another running song. I like excursions. I like excursions. I like excursions. He found it splendid. The top of the inclined plane at Schenectady was almost in sight when another terrible shriek rose from the coaches behind DeWitt. Fire! Fire! Help! Fire! Blacknose was quickly stopped again. This time there was no bang behind him. The straight pieces of wood fastened between the coaches held them apart. Looking back along his boiler, Blacknose saw a lady on top of the first coach, jumping up and down in great excitement. A gentleman in shirt sleeves appeared to be wrapping her head in a coat. It all seemed very strange. Soon they held up a round red object. Then Blacknose couldn't see anything more, but David Matthew was laughing again when he returned to start the engine. "We must find a way to make you eat your sparks, old iron horse. You can't go setting fire to ladies' bonnets anymore. That parasol should protect her for a while, I hope." Schenectady, Schenectady, Schenectady! At last, Little DeWitt pulled his long train of golden coaches beside the Schenectady station. He stood puffing and gasping in the middle of a great crowd of welcoming people. "Isn't he a hummer?" they cried. "Isn't he a hummer?" shouted Tommy Beers. "Isn't he a hummer?" cried the lady whose bonnet he had burned. Everyone cheered him. "Hurrah for the DeWitt Clinton! Hurrah for the first excursion! Hurrah for the Mohawk and Hudson Railroad!" Then all the passengers he had carried continued by horse car for another 1.25 miles into Schenectady. There they ate a tremendous dinner in his honour. Little DeWitt Clinton, newly baptized King of the Rails, settled down to enjoy a well-earned rest. He had certainly shown them this time what a wonder he truly was. Chapter 5. Enter John Bull. "Oh, my reins and traces, how wet I'm getting," complained the old red horse as he stood in a pool of water. Drip, drip, drip. The rain poured down. It made a patter-rat-tat-patter on the roof of the shed beneath which Blacknose stood. It dripped from the eaves, splashed through the trees, and soaked into the spongy ground. The shining rails became glistening ribbons of silver. They stretched across the wet earth, growing thinner and thinner until they disappeared into the grey fog. Even the old red horse's back glistened and steamed in the rain as workmen fastened him to the first coach Blacknose would normally have pulled. Blacknose remained warm and dry inside his little shed. In those days it was called a longhouse instead of a roundhouse. The old horse splashed his feet in puddles and tried to swallow the enormous drops running down his lean, roan cheeks. Brr, glug, oof! I, with my sensitive skin, must soak in this miserable rain while that iron beast stays dry. Selfish, horrid, long-nosed loafer! But he only grumbled to himself. Ever since the excursion, all the horses had been afraid of Blacknose. "My, what a nasty temper that old red horse has today," thought Blacknose. "But I don't blame him very much. Here I am, warm, dry, and comfortable. There he is, soaked to the last hair of his tail. But then he's only a horse, and I'm a new invention, a hummer, the pride of the country. They take good care of me." They certainly did. If Blacknose had been made of gold and diamonds, they couldn't have treated him better. A notice about him was posted in every hotel in Albany and Schenectady. The engine, with a train of cars, will run daily when the weather is fair. When the weather is not fair, horses will draw the cars. Passengers are requested to be punctual at the hour of departure. When the weather is not fair, horses will draw the cars. That was exactly what the horses were doing today. Oh, how it rained! With whickers, whinnies, and waving tails, the horses started forward. Splashing, stamping, and snorting, they pulled the yellow coaches along the track. The old roan horse looked over his shoulder and rolled his yellow eyes at Blacknose. As the distance between them widened, he became bolder. Finally, he called back loudly, showing his ugly yellow teeth. "Some day you'll know how it feels to work like a horse. Another creature is coming to take your place. I heard them say so. Then you'll do the rainy work, you great puffed-up iron horror. Some day you'll see. We'll get even with you yet." Whatever did the roan horse mean? For a moment, the comfortable shed didn't seem quite so warm and dry to little Blacknose. A strange new feeling prickled through his boiler. Another creature coming to take my place. But no, surely that couldn't be true. There was no one like him. There could be no one like him. Everyone said so. On the excursion, he had won such glory. Every pleasant day since then, his coaches had been filled with cheering passengers. Surely he would run forever, happy and free, the king of the shining rails. The day after the rain was crisp and clear. Little Blacknose stood happily on his track with 5 yellow coaches fastened behind him. More people than ever wanted to ride that day. Every seat on top was occupied, and more passengers kept trying to climb aboard. His steam was up, but he was still hungry. "Feed my firebox. Feed my firebox." Adam Robinson, the fireman, opened the firebox door and shoveled coal into his hungry mouth. Delicious, delicious! Blacknose really preferred good pitch pine wood because coal was difficult to chew. But when he ate coal, he didn't become hungry again quite so quickly. David Matthew pulled the lever. "To Dick, to Dack, get off the track!" Blacknose had only begun to move when a hatless man he had never seen came sprinting beside the track, waving his arms and shouting, David Matthew, stop the engine! I must speak to you, stop the engine!" David Matthew reversed the lever. For a moment, the little engine shivered and strained to continue. Then he stopped dead on the track. It was difficult, but he had to obey. He didn't like it, and he hated the new man immediately. What right did a stranger have to stop DeWitt Clinton, the king of the road? Hundreds of people were waiting for him in Schenectady. Now he was behind schedule. It was an outrage. Shame! Shame! No one paid any attention. David Matthew greeted the newcomer with excitement. "John Hampton, how are you?" "I'm glad to see you, Mr. Matthew. Are you ready for the new one, sir?" "What? Has it arrived already?" "The Mary Howland came from Liverpool and docked last week, sir. The Robert Fulton was aboard her. It's a great monster, twice the size of this one. We'll bring it up this afternoon if you're ready. It's already in Albany." Blacknose didn't hear the rest of their conversation, but he had heard the words, "A great monster, twice the size of this one." Whatever did they mean? He didn't know, but he felt a strange pressure inside his pipes and boiler. They had always said he might burst someday. Perhaps he was going to do it now. Had the time come? Why did he feel so strange? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear! Was something else truly coming to take his place? Was that what the old roan horse had meant? When they started Blacknose again, he groaned aloud. "To Dick, to Dack, alas, alack." He repeated it all the way to Schenectady. He travelled so slowly that he seemed to crawl along the track. David Matthew grew angry. Adam, the fireman, fed him chunk after chunk of coal until he nearly choked. Still, Blacknose wouldn't, shouldn't, couldn't go any faster. "To Dick, to Dack, alas, alack." All the way back from Schenectady, he sang his mournful song, feeling more miserable with every turn of his wrought iron wheels. At last, Blacknose reached the top of the inclined plane at Lydia Street, the Albany end of the track. The stationary engine that had pulled him up the hill only weeks before was working hard again. Round and round its great spool turned, winding the enormous chain. Creaking, groaning, and winding, it slowly pulled something very heavy up the hill. All the passengers jumped from Blacknose's coaches and ran to watch. David Matthew ran away and left him. Adam Robinson jumped down and left him. A crowd gathered around the stationary engine, watching and cheering. For the first time in his entire life, Little Blacknose was left unnoticed and alone. At first, he couldn't see what was approaching. Then, high against the skyline, something slowly rose over the crest of the hill. It was a monster engine. It was so big, so black, so terrible, that poor little Blacknose was horribly frightened. His smoke became stuck inside his smokestack. He choked with misery and fear. Then he noticed the old roan horse standing beside the crowd. All the people had eyes only for the new engine. But the old red horse was watching Blacknose.
Chapter 7.
Watching him.
Success.
And laughing.
It was September 26th, 1831.
Little Blacknose didn't know the date, nor would he have cared. But he did know that something had awakened him very early. A great roaring and commotion came from outside his shed. At first, he couldn't understand what caused the noise, where it came from, or what it meant. As he listened, he realized it came from hundreds of people shouting together. He had never heard so many people in his entire engine life. Then he noticed that John Bull was gone. "They have taken him out and left me." Then he understood. "It's his excursion, and I'm not part of it." Poor little Blacknose felt as though he would never get his steam up again. "Mr. Governor is coming!" people shouted outside. "Taken, and I'm left." "Make way for the judges of the Supreme Court!" "It's a much bigger excursion than mine," Blacknose thought. "Make way for the Lieutenant Governor!" "I only had a former governor come to see me." "I hereby name you Robert Fulton." "That's the wrong name. He should be called John Bull or Old Puffy." Blacknose could only listen. He couldn't see what was happening. He remained in his dark shed for hours, or so it seemed. He was becoming horribly hungry. No chunks of wood, not even a nibble of coal, no water. No breakfast, no breakfast, no breakfast. It was the first time he hadn't been fed and cared for. It was the first time he hadn't been needed. Then an unpleasant voice came through the window. "I guess your smokestack's out of joint now." It was the old roan horse sticking his ugly reddish-yellow nose through the window and jeering at the poor little engine. For a long moment, Rednose stared at Blacknose, and Blacknose bravely stared back. The horse gave one final contemptuous whinny. "I expect they'll still take you out, sometimes, on rainy days." A moment later, the window was empty. Then a gang of men rushed into the shed and began pushing and pulling little Blacknose. "What can they want with me?" he wondered sadly. A terrible thought shot through his pipes and boiler. They were taking him outside for the crowd to laugh at. They would place him beside the enormous new engine. Everyone would point, laugh, and say how small and strange he looked. He wouldn't go. He couldn't go. If only he could remain unnoticed inside his little dark shed. Blacknose tried to brace his spokes and prevent his wheels from turning, but it was useless. They rolled him into the middle of the cheering crowd. He wouldn't look. He couldn't look. Then he noticed the English engine. John Bull stood a short distance down the track with his steam up and a wreath of flowers around his enormous neck. He looked great, grand, and glorious. 10 bright coaches were fastened behind him, but strangely, every coach was empty. Why doesn't he go? Why are all the people outside the coaches? What is wrong with him? The sun was already high. It must be terribly late. Blacknose could have travelled to Schenectady and back many times by now. David Matthew pushed through the crowd. "Will even David laugh at me?" But David placed a loving hand on the little engine's cold boiler. "Stoke him up, men. We'll have to use DeWitt Clinton after all." A deafening roar rose from the enormous crowd. "Hurrah for DeWitt Clinton! Hurrah for the little American engine! Hurrah for our own brother Jonathan! Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah!" At last, Blacknose dared to look. The people weren't laughing at him. They were cheering, waving, praising, and calling his name, just as they had before. For a moment, he felt as if a large chunk of coal had become stuck in his supply pipe. He felt shaky and strange. Then, real chunks of shining coal began falling into his poor, starving firebox. Breakfast, breakfast, breakfast. His steam was coming. It was the English engine's excursion, but they had been forced to send for him. Breakfast, breakfast, breakfast. What was wrong with John Bull? Couldn't he go? Blacknose had seen him run during a trial. The big, proud engine had creaked along with a horrible noise from the wooden spokes inside his iron wheel rims. But he certainly wasn't going anywhere now. Silly old English engine. The workmen removed all 10 coaches from John Bull. 3 were fastened behind Blacknose. 7 horses were led forward, each harnessed to one of the remaining coaches. The great excursion train was finally ready, and Blacknose stood at its head. People rushed to squeeze into his 3 coaches. What shouting, pushing, cheering, and waving of tickets there was! The little engine looked proudly along his train. All the great people of the land are riding behind me. The governor, lieutenant governor, senators, and judges of the Supreme Court, all behind me. Only the almost great ride behind the horses. Toot, toot, toot! The conductor blew his tin horn. Hooray, hooray, hurrah! Shouted the passengers. They were off at last. As Blacknose's wheels began turning, he heard a furious neigh from the old roan horse, who was harnessed to the first coach behind him. Baby iron beast, if it weren't for you, I'd reach Schenectady first. Get out of my way. Blacknose only laughed. Chew, 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 chew your own smoke. Soon you won't even be able to smell mine. Chew, chew, chew. Then Blacknose noticed the proud English engine looking very miserable. The flowers around John Bull's smokestack had already begun to wilt. T-double-Y ditty, off for Schenectady. The wind whistled over Blacknose's smokestack. Trees flew past in grey streaks. The rails gleamed beneath him. He had never travelled so quickly. In only 46 minutes, he stood puffing at the Schenectady end of the track. Everyone cheered as they climbed from his yellow coaches. It's the greatest moment of my life, cried the governor, stretching his legs. A remarkable experience, said the lieutenant governor. Such speed, exclaimed the judges, straightening their hats. But where are the horses? Asked a senator. I don't see them, sir, David Matthew answered, gazing into the distance. Where were the horses? They waited 29 weary minutes. The workmen removed all 10 coaches from John Bull. 3 were fastened behind Blacknose. 7 horses were led forward, each harnessed to one of the remaining coaches. The great excursion train was finally ready, and Blacknose stood at its head. People rushed to squeeze into his 3 coaches. What shouting, pushing, cheering, and waving of tickets there was! The little engine looked proudly along his train. All the great people of the land are riding behind me. The governor, lieutenant governor, senators, and judges of the Supreme Court, all behind me. Only the almost great ride behind the horses. Toot, toot, toot! The conductor blew his tin horn. Hooray, hooray, hurrah! Shouted the passengers. They were off at last. As Blacknose's wheels began turning, he heard a furious neigh from the old roan horse, who was harnessed to the first coach behind him. Baby iron beast, if it weren't for you, I'd reach Schenectady first. Get out of my way. Blacknose only laughed. Chew, 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 chew your own smoke. Soon you won't even be able to smell mine. Chew, chew, chew. Then Blacknose noticed the proud English engine looking very miserable. The flowers around John Bull's smokestack had already begun to wilt. T-double-Y ditty, off for Schenectady. The wind whistled over Blacknose's smokestack. Trees flew past in grey streaks. The rails gleamed beneath him. He had never travelled so quickly. In only 46 minutes, he stood puffing at the Schenectady end of the track. Everyone cheered as they climbed from his yellow coaches. It's the greatest moment of my life, cried the governor, stretching his legs. A remarkable experience, said the lieutenant governor. Such speed, exclaimed the judges, straightening their hats. But where are the horses? Asked a senator. I don't see them, sir, David Matthew answered, gazing into the distance. Where were the horses? They waited 29 weary minutes. Finally, the first horse struggled over the last hill and pulled his coach behind Blacknose's train. It was the old roan horse, staggering, breathless, and completely exhausted. So, you wanted to get ahead of me. What do you think of engines now, Rony? Puffed Blacknose. But poor old Rony didn't even look at him. He closed his eyes, drooped his ugly nose, and leaned against the shafts on tired, trembling legs. After all the passengers arrived, they climbed into carriages that had come to meet them. They're going to get their coal and water, I suppose, Blacknose thought. 2 hours later, everyone returned. The excursion train was prepared for the journey back. To deck, to dack, let's hurry back. Never had Blacknose run so well. In only 38 minutes, just over half an hour, he returned to the Albany end of the track. He was breathing hard, but every puff was filled with pride. Gee, Samuel Whitakers, cried David Matthew as he climbed down. We travelled 19 miles an hour. We covered the last 6 miles in only 14 minutes. Tremendous, said the governor. I have never known such speed. Hurrah for DeWitt Clinton, cried the passengers. Hurrah for brother Jonathan, our own American engine, shouted the senators. Hurrah for the West Point foundry, cried David Matthew. All this time, the English engine stood quietly nearby, completely unnoticed. John Bull looked miserable. In his moment of triumph, Blacknose almost felt sorry for him. Then he realized that John Bull was trying to speak. The English engine had only a little steam left, so his voice was weak and indistinct. My dear chap, very grateful to you. Blacknose could barely understand him. I thought we hadn't been introduced, Blacknose puffed. The moment he said it, he wished he hadn't. The poor English engine looked so sad. After Little Blacknose saved John Bull's excursion from failure, the two engines became firm friends. They took turns travelling the same route. They drank water from the same watering station and stood side by side in the long shed. At night, they almost dreamed each other's dreams. They had long and serious arguments about the best kind of fuel. Pine is best, hissed Little Blacknose, who still loved wood. With respect, anthracite coal is best. I insist, answered the English engine. But John Bull couldn't prove it, so the argument began all over again. They also argued about how many passengers they carried, how fast they travelled, how many cows they frightened, and how many horses ran away from them. But the more they hissed, tooted, and sputtered, the happier they became, and the stronger their friendship grew. Whenever John Bull creaked away towards Schenectady, Little Blacknose gazed wistfully down the track until he returned. Ank shush, ank shush, ank shush, he murmured. Whenever it was Blacknose's turn to pull the yellow coaches, John Bull became terribly restless. I miss you. I miss you. I miss you, he sputtered, staring anxiously into the distance. What stories they told each other when they were together again in the long shed. I had a snake's head in my first coach today, Blacknose announced one evening. Tell me about it, old chap. A piece of iron stripping along the wooden track must have come loose. The front wheel of my first coach ran beneath it and sent it twisting straight up through the coach floor. You should have heard the ladies scream. It frightened me terribly. And the way they stopped me, no concern for me at all. It twisted me, strained me, and nearly ruined me. You must watch for it. It might come loose again, just beyond the crossroads, beside the watering trough at Davies's farm. I'm not afraid of snakeheads. My wheels are extremely heavy. Don't be superior, hissed Blacknose. Hush, you saucy little engine, answered John Bull. Silly, I'm not saucy. and the argument began again. But the longer they argued, the stronger their friendship became. Throughout September, October, November, and December, the two engines worked and played together. Then the snow became so deep that their wheels could barely push through it. The journey to Schenectady seemed very long indeed. The days were now so cold that hardly anyone came to ride in the yellow coaches. Little Blacknose's breath nearly froze as he puffed. Sometimes, when he stood without steam, he wore a tiny moustache of icicles beneath his long black nose. One morning, near the end of December, no gang of workmen came to roll Blacknose from the long shed. Beside him, the English engine remained fast asleep. Outside the shed window, hundreds of white snowflakes drifted slowly and sleepily, down, across, and over. Blacknose watched them for a long moment. So sleepy. So sleepy. English engine is sleepy too. Must sleep. His steam was out, of course. It was only the echo of steam inside his little engine mind. But sleep he did. Little Blacknose slept peacefully beneath the falling snow. April 19th arrived warm and bright. Behind the old railroad shed, a row of yellow daffodils nodded cheerfully in the spring sunshine. Little Blacknose stirred in his sleep. Suddenly, the shed door flew open. "Wake up, old Black Bear! It's time to stop hibernating!" David Matthew gave the little engine's boiler a vigorous slap. Ah, Blacknose was wide awake now. Where had he been all this time? Water, coal, breakfast. Oh, how he wanted them. Water, coal, breakfast. Why, he had work to do. He had to travel to Schenectady. That was it, Schenectady. Beside him, the English engine was also being awakened, not too gently. Soon, both engines were rolled onto the track. They were watered, fueled, oiled, and inspected. Now they were wide awake, though they blinked rather foolishly in the bright spring sunshine. "Hello, English," called DeWitt Clinton. "Cheerio, old chappie," John Bull answered. Little Blacknose felt strong and happy after his long winter sleep. Why, it was great fun to be an engine. He had work to do, coaches to pull, and a long track stretching ahead of him. How wonderful the track looked! How brightly it shone in the spring sunshine! That was it. It was spring. Spring! 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 Chapter 9. Scrapped? It was April when Little Blacknose awakened from his long winter sleep. Now it was a hot day in August, exactly 1 year since his first excursion. How long ago that seemed! How many journeys he had made, and how many passengers he had carried since that famous day. Phew! How hot it was! Blacknose pulled wearily into the Albany station and stopped. The sun beat down on his poor boiler, and the fire inside his firebox seemed unbearable. He wished he could live entirely on water during these hot summer days. Where was the breeze that usually blew from the Hudson River Valley? It was rarely this hot upon the high plateau. Phew, phew, phew. Beyond the station, at the end of the track, stood John Bull. It was his turn to make the next trip, and he seemed excited about something. When he saw Blacknose, he called, "I say, old chap." "Yes?" "The stationary engine is working today. He's pulling something up the hill." Sure enough, the strange stationary engine was hard at work again. Round and round its enormous spool turned, winding the heavy chain. The engine itself never moved an inch. Whatever was attached to the chain came slowly up the wooden incline. Blacknose forgot the heat and his tiredness. The last time he watched the stationary engine pull something up that hill, it had been John Bull. How Blacknose had hated and feared him then, and how he loved him now. "English engine, what do you suppose—" Blacknose never finished his question. Over the top of the hill came another engine, large, shining, and new. What an engine it was! "My brakes!" hissed John Bull. "It looks like a centipede." It certainly looked strange. The new engine was long and low and appeared to be made almost entirely of wheels. It had 2 pairs of driving wheels. Beneath its boiler was a small, movable car called a truck with 4 more wheels. The newcomer had twice as many wheels as Blacknose or John Bull. For a long moment, the truck engine blinked at the 2 older engines. They stared firmly back. "He seems shy," whispered Blacknose. "Somewhat," John Bull agreed. Blacknose decided to be friendly. "How are you, stranger? Have you come from far?" "Just up the Hudson," the truck engine stammered. "I was born last week at the West Point foundry." "Why, so was I," cried Blacknose. "Not last week, though." From that moment, Blacknose and the truck engine were firm friends. Neither Blacknose nor John Bull knew it, and the newcomer didn't know it himself, but this truck engine was the first American locomotive in a new series. He was called American Locomotive No. 1, Second Series. The 4-wheeled truck beneath his boiler could twist and turn on its pivot. That allowed the new engine to travel around curbs, something neither John Bull nor Blacknose could do. For a long time, there were no curbs because the railroad had been built straight. Even the truck engine didn't know how wonderful he was. 13 years passed, and Little Blacknose continued travelling his old route. He was becoming very tired. These days, he could barely climb the long, slow grade to Schenectady. Things had changed. He rarely saw his old friend John Bull. The new engine house was enormous, and the 2 friends were kept at opposite ends. It was hard, but Blacknose tried to make the best of it. Then he heard that the stationary engine was being removed. The track would run all the way into the city of Albany, and the station would be moved there too. That worried him. This new-fangled ways. How could he climb the steep hill leading from Albany to the old station, the hill up which the stationary engine had once pulled him? Now it would become part of his regular route. "It's too far," he complained to the newest engine. "It's too steep. I fear I shall be scrapped soon." Blacknose had heard what happened to worn-out engines. They were broken apart, thrown away, and sold as old iron. Would that happen to him? "Nonsense!" cried the newest engine as he hurried easily up the steep hill. But Blacknose knew it wasn't nonsense. As he watched the new engine climb, he understood that his own working days were nearly over. One morning, David Matthew had tears in his eyes when he came to roll Blacknose from the large new engine house. "Speed up, my hearty. It's your last trip today." Little Blacknose understood, but he raised his black smokestack more proudly than ever and coughed as bravely as he had when he was young. Down and out, was he? Well, they would see. "To-dick, to-dack, get off the track." Blacknose chugged forward and successfully climbed the grade beyond the old shed. To double wide ditty, to double wide ditty. Blacknose entered the woods, where cool air flowed along his boiler. He crossed the little bridge and passed the first crossroads. Choo! There was the old spotted cow, standing much too close to the track, as always. Cows, always slow, always in the way. Why didn't she jump and run as she had when Blacknose was young? Choo! No, it took the wild young engines with their new whistles to frighten cows nowadays. Blacknose stopped for one final drink at the old watering station. Then he began the long, slow climb to Schenectady. Hard, 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 hard. But he was making it, just as he always had. At last he reached the station. Blacknose carefully watched his passengers as they walked away. Then he studied the new passengers filling his yellow coaches. I must remember how they look when I have no more passengers to carry. He never forgot one little girl wearing a cornflower blue bonnet. She waved and waved and waved as he rolled away from Schenectady and began the return journey to Albany. It's her last look at DeWitt Clinton, but she'll remember me, he thought. Blacknose ran his very fastest and best over the entire old route. Finally, tired, hot, and worn, he stopped in front of the large new Albany station, a station that had always seemed strange to him. Well done, DeWitt. Well done, old brother Jonathan, cried David Matthew. Why did David's voice sound so hoarse and strange? His last trip was over, but Blacknose had done his best. He briefly remembered the old roan horse. Years ago, they had taken the horse away. Where was he now? In what distant pasture? Had he felt this way? The following day, workmen lifted DeWitt Clinton with an enormous crane and swung him into storage inside the Albany station. It was a dim and quiet room, rather like the old shed. Blacknose settled peacefully into a far corner. He wasn't unhappy. Rest. After all, rest was what an old engine needed after working faithfully for 14 years. Perhaps I won't be scrapped. Perhaps they will leave me here to rest. That is what I need. Rest. The other engines must do my work now. After all, I was the first of them, the very first. If I had failed, they might never have come. King of the rails, that's what I was. Rest. Perhaps I won't be scrapped. Chapter 10. Forgiven. For 50 long years, Little Blacknose dreamed and rested in his quiet corner of the station. A thick grey coat of dust settled over his proud black boiler, and streaks of rust appeared along his sides. But dozing in that peaceful place wasn't unpleasant. He often dreamed about the old days, when he was young, new, and considered quite a wonder. Once again, he saw himself proudly puffing along the track, pulling the great excursion train with his bright yellow coaches rattling behind him. Once again, his wheels turned faster and faster. He felt the wind against his boiler, heard the passengers cheering, and watched frightened horses turn and run. Sometimes he dreamed that he heard a familiar, heavy creaking and saw old John Bull pulling into the engine house beside him. "How are you, old John Bull? Cheerio, old chappie." It was difficult to awaken and discover that he was still alone. Blacknose had one favourite dream. In it, he glided down the shining rails while a little girl with blue eyes and a cornflower blue bonnet waved at him. But as the years passed, not all his dreams were pleasant. Sometimes he rushed helplessly down a slippery track, faster and faster toward a great stone mountain he couldn't climb. In his worst dream, he was slowly torn apart and thrown piece by piece into a blazing furnace, where he melted away. As the years passed, that dream came more often. Eventually, he hardly knew whether it was a dream at all. It seemed always with him, haunting and frightening him. Someday they will come for me. Surely they won't leave me forever in this peaceful corner. Someday they will come, and then I shall finally be scrapped. One day, the great door at the end of the station room slowly opened. A gang of workmen rushed inside carrying chains and tools. Little Blacknose knew that his time had come. Yes, they had come for him. Was the poor old engine taking up too much room? Scrapped! Scrapped! Perhaps they would use part of him to build a new locomotive. The workmen fastened him to an enormous crane, lifted him from his quiet room, and slowly lowered him from a dizzying height toward the station yard below. Scrapped. Down. 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 How strange everything looked. Dozens of tracks stretched below Blacknose, where once there had been only one, Great monsters roared along them, snorting, puffing, and breathing fire. Could those enormous machines really be engines? And what were those strange, long houses travelling on wheels? Clang, 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 clang! Here was the glowing furnace from his nightmares. Not one furnace, but many. They had brought him to a tremendous foundry where monster engines were born every day. Were those terrifying iron mountains truly locomotives? Then the workmen tore the rusty plates from Blacknose's sides. They removed his old copper tubes. Finally, his proud black nose was gone. Scrapped. Every day he waited for the end. But then something strange happened. New copper tubes replaced the old ones. Fresh plates, strong and free of rust, were fastened to his sides. A new black nose rose proudly from his front. It was even taller and finer than the old one. Best of all, a shining coat of paint made him look so magnificent that he barely recognized himself. Scrapped? Not Little Blacknose. What were they doing to him? Was he going to run again, free and happy, snorting at cows and feeling the wind rush along his boiler? To Dick, to Dack. Yes, he remembered his old song. Oh, how he wanted to sing his running song again. Perhaps I shall soon, he whispered. His steam wasn't up, of course, but engines always think steamishly. When the workmen took Blacknose from the foundry, rebuilt, polished, and even given a taller nose, they carried him into the engine yard. But they didn't place him on the track. Instead, they hoisted him into one of the long, narrow houses on wheels that he had noticed earlier. Then they closed a large sliding door and left him in darkness. Poor little Blacknose. After waiting for so long and hoping to run again, he found himself alone in this dark, stuffy place. No one paid attention to him, and there were no delicious chunks of coal to eat. I say, this is disgusting. Soon, the long, narrow house began moving. Bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum. It continued for a very long time. Blacknose wisely guessed that he was being transported somewhere aboard a railroad train. That made him extremely angry. If they wanted me to go somewhere, why didn't they let me travel under my own steam? Why did they give me new pipes? Why did they give me a bigger, better nose, only to rattle me around inside an old, dark house? Yes, he was very angry. But when the workmen finally removed him from the strange house, which was, of course, a freight car, his anger disappeared. Great wonder took its place. They carried him on a truck through the streets of a white, gleaming city. The buildings shone like snow beneath the sunlight. Blacknose had seen New York and Albany. He had often seen the rooftops of Schenectady, but he had never seen anything like this. How beautiful everything was! How glad and happy he felt! Soon, they carried him inside an enormous building, larger and far more beautiful than any railroad station he had ever seen. Above the entrance were the words, Transportation Building. This was the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. Of course, Blacknose couldn't read the sign, so it didn't mean much to him. What did matter was that the workmen placed him high upon a platform where everyone could see him. Crowds of people came to look at him and call him a wonder, exactly as they had in the old days. But how strangely people dressed! Where were the pretty bonnets, tall hats, and striped trousers he remembered? Looking around, Blacknose noticed many engines and models of engines. Some were funny early machines that had hardly been used at all. Blacknose felt rather superior to them. He was glad that he had received new paint and a bigger, better nose. Still, something was missing. If only I could run. If only I didn't have to stand so still. Then he heard a voice in the crowd. Mehitabel, I know it is. Are you sure, Grandma? Asked a little girl. What a funny little engine. It doesn't look as though it could ever have run. darling, I know it is. Look, here's a card telling us all about it. Yes, this is the engine that frightened my mother and made me sick when I was your age. How we bumped, jumped, jerked, and jiggled. Isn't he a wonder? An elderly lady and a little girl stood among the crowd admiring Blacknose. The older lady's eyes were still beautiful, large, soft, shining black eyes that sparkled as she looked at him. The little girl was extremely excited. As Blacknose watched them, he suddenly thought he understood. The little girl was called Mehitabel. Black eyes. Shake them up! The clothing was different, but the face looked familiar. Yes, Blacknose was certain that the elderly lady was the little girl he had frightened so many years before. Could the child beside her be that little girl's granddaughter? Oh, how old Blacknose had become. I'm sure. Had the older lady forgiven him? He had always been so sorry. Had she told terrible stories about him to the child now gazing at him with such wonder? Isn't he a darling? The grandmother said. Oh, Grandma, I wish I could ride behind him. He isn't half as frightening as the engines today. Well, come along, my dear. But, Grandma, I haven't even begun looking at him. We must go, dear. Please tell me the story again right away, Grandma. Blacknose was forgiven after all these years. The poor little car-sick girl with the black eyes had forgiven him and had even called him a darling. Little Blacknose felt warm and happy. He became even happier when he noticed a familiar shape on another platform nearby. Could it be? Oh, joy, it was! His old friend John Bull. If only Blacknose had his steam up so he could speak to him. But simply being in the same building with his old friend again was almost enough happiness. Surely John Bull could see him. Blacknose imagined that he could hear the English engine calling to him. Cheerio, old chappie. Chapter 11. To-dick, to-dack. Bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum. Little Blacknose had a wonderful time while he was displayed at the World's Fair in Chicago. It was delightful to be admired and praised all day long. If only they had allowed him to run around a little by himself, he would have been perfectly happy. As it was, he hoped the fair would continue forever, and that he would never again be shut away alone. Bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum. But Blacknose had learned that things didn't always happen as he wished. Here he was again, shut inside a dark, stuffy freight car, travelling in a most insulting manner to goodness knew where. The World's Fair was over. They no longer needed him. Everything had been removed from the enormous building where he had lived so happily for one delightful year. Bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum. Perhaps, when this lonely journey ended, they would place him on a track and allow him to try his wheels. Perhaps they would feed him a good meal of delicious pitch pine. Oh, how long his poor, aching firebox had been empty. Delicious pitch pine. But no! When the workmen removed him from the freight car, cramped and tired after the long journey from Chicago, they hauled him back into storage in his old dusty corner of the Albany station. Dust. Nothing but loneliness and dust. After all the honour and glory of the fair, and after all his hopes of running free, he had returned to this. If only they had taken him into the countryside and left him on one small, unimportant track. He knew he wasn't strong enough to pull the loads carried by the enormous modern engines. But just one little country track, just one cow to frighten, just one chance to feel his wheels turn again. Dust, dust, dust. It drifted down his smokestack and made him choke. It covered his wheels and made them feel old and tired. It hid the glory of his new black paint. For 33 more years, little Blacknose remained alone in the Albany station, unhappy, gloomy, and lost in dreams. Then, one day, how warm the sunshine felt, how wonderful the fresh air tasted. Why, His wheels were resting upon a track again. Behind him stood his old wooden tender, filled with barrels of delicious pitch pine. Was he dreaming? Delicious pitch pine! Delicious! Yes, his steam was coming, creeping through his pipes and warming his old boiler. Here were his cheerful yellow coaches. Workmen fastened them behind him, bright, handsome coaches, looking exactly as he remembered them. Clang, clang, clang! Toot, toot, toot! Suddenly, an enormous engine roared beside him. "Where did you come from, and what are you doing on our track, you funny little cockroach?" The giant towered so high above Blacknose that it blocked the sky. It was so long that when its front stood beside Blacknose's smokestack, its rear stretched beyond the last yellow coach. It was the grandfather giant of all engines. What was Little Blacknose doing beside it? Surely he was dreaming. Then real people began climbing into his coaches. If this was a dream, it was the best part. These passengers looked exactly as people should look. The ladies wore beautiful bonnets lined with brilliant silk and tied with bright ribbons. Their skirts were full and flounced. The gentlemen wore tall hats and long, swallow-tailed coats. This was how people had dressed on the day of his first great excursion. The giant engine spoke again. "Cockroach, your nose is much too large, and of course you can't move." Blacknose had almost decided he was asleep, but the giant's rudeness made him feel immediately awake. "I can go when and where I choose. I can travel 30 miles an hour. I don't suppose you go much faster." "Faster? I?" The giant laughed with a booming roar that made Blacknose tremble on the track. "I can travel more than 100 miles an hour any day, you stupid little crawling worm. You call me names. I was the first of all the New York Central engines." "The first, perhaps, but not the best," the giant replied. "Why I must run beside you today is more than I understand. But you will never move, no matter how much wooden rubbish you burn. No size, no power, no steam. Your nose is too long, your wheels are flimsy, and your sickly little coaches are laughable. Each of my coaches carries 84 passengers, and I can pull 20 of them as though they were feathers. Goodbye. I must be off. I don't suppose you'll ever move at all." A terrible fear struck Little Blacknose. Perhaps the giant was right. Blacknose was finally standing upon a track. His coaches were filled with hopeful passengers. He had to go. But could he, after all these years? Blacknose's throat was husky, but he began his old running song. "Tidick, tidack, get off the track." The passengers cheered behind him. Someone blew a sharp blast on a tin horn, the old signal he remembered. "T-double-Y ditty, off for Schenectady." His song became clearer. He felt his levers move. Slowly, slowly, his wheels began turning. Yes, he could go. Choo, choo, choo. He ran exactly as he had in the old days, moving faster and faster along the shining rails. The giant engine called, "So you discovered that you can move a little after all, old cockroach?" "I seem to have caught up with you," Blacknose answered. Despite all the giant's boasting, he didn't seem much faster. Blacknose didn't know that the 20th Century Limited, the giant engine's name, had been ordered to wait for him. For a while they travelled side by side. Everywhere they went, enormous crowds watched and cheered for Blacknose. Hardly anyone noticed the proud monster beside him. How different the road to Schenectady looked. Where were the horses, cows, bridges, farms, and forests he remembered? There were houses and people everywhere. What were those small carriages carrying people without horses pulling them? "Choo!" Blacknose called. They didn't notice. "Choo, choo, choo!" They didn't jump at all. But what fun it was to run free again, to turn his wheels round and glide happily along the rails. Near Schenectady, another crowd came to meet him. The old-fashioned passengers climbed from his coaches and joined the celebration. "DeWitt Clinton! Hooray! Hooray!" They fastened an enormous wreath beneath his black nose. It felt like his wonderful first excursion all over again. A man with a voice like an engine explained that exactly 100 years earlier, far-seeing people had founded the Mohawk and Hudson Railway, now part of the New York Central. Blacknose had been the first engine to travel its track. Today, they had gathered to honor him and celebrate the railroad's 100th birthday. Blacknose was extremely proud. The long years of neglect were forgotten. The 20th Century Limited stood quietly ignored, while Blacknose was hero of the hour. Then a carriage came close beside him, pulled by an old roan horse. "Choo, choo, choo!" The startled horse turned and ran away, with the carriage and driver bouncing behind. "Ha ha ha! I can still frighten the silly old horses!" Chapter 12. Little Blacknose Enthroned. After Little Blacknose pulled his yellow coaches back to Albany, and after all his cheerful, old-fashioned passengers climbed down and departed, he suddenly realized how tired he was. What a day it had been! Such honor and glory had come to him. But now that it was over, would they return him to that dark and lonely corner? Oh, how he dreaded it! What had happened to John Bull after the World's Fair ended? If only Blacknose could find him. If only the two old friends could stand together side by side upon some peaceful track. To be alone through all the years ahead. Alone. At any moment they'll put me back inside that awful dirty corner, Blacknose thought. Rust, rust, rust. That's what waits for me. But no. After the New York Central Railroad's 100th birthday celebration ended, the workmen carefully wrapped the little engine in many canvas covers. They placed him aboard an open freight car and gave him another long journey over the bumpy rails. Bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum, bumbledy-bum. If only I could see where I'm going, this wouldn't be so bad, thought Blacknose. How he wanted to see, and yet how he dreaded it. The nightmare of the scrap heap was always with him. He had completed his final run. Surely they were taking him away to be discarded now. The bumbledy-bum stopped. He felt himself being carried, but where? Oh, how he longed and feared to see. Then the workmen began removing his coverings. His wheels were free. His boiler was uncovered. Finally, they pulled away the last canvas wrapping. Blacknose found himself inside the strangest and most wonderful place in the world. This was no scrap heap. This was no dark corner. This was no rust pile. At first, brilliant lights blinded him. Lights above, lights below, and lights all around. They made him dizzy, confused, and uncertain. Then, Blacknose realized he was looking down from a very high place into an enormous hall. Crowds hurried down wide marble stairways, rushed across a vast open space, and poured through distant entrances. In the center stood a funny little round booth. In all his 95 years, Blacknose had never seen so many people. Where in the world am I? Am I indoors? Is this a palace? Am I sitting upon some kind of throne? Blacknose looked up. Above his head was a blue sky, or something that appeared to be a blue sky. Friendly little stars twinkled down at him. It's indoors, yet it's outdoors too. Perhaps this is heaven, a kind of engine heaven. Whatever it isn't the scrap heap. It isn't dark or dusty. It's strange, but it's the loveliest place I have ever seen. Then, from far away and deep below, Blacknose heard an old familiar sound. It was a whistling rush and roar, the unmistakable call of engines. A great understanding dawned upon him. Why, I believe it's a railroad station. It must be the largest railroad station in the world. All these people are rushing to catch trains. I can't see the trains, but I can hear and feel them. The trains are there. I know they're there. Blacknose was right. This was Grand Central Terminal, the great railroad station in New York City. The blue sky was actually the station's enormous blue ceiling, high above him. The twinkling stars were electric lights arranged to resemble stars in a real night sky. The little round booth was where officials helped confused travellers find the proper trains. Blacknose wasn't placed on a regular track, of course. His running days were over. Instead, he stood upon a gallery high above one end of the great central hall. From there, he could watch all the hurried travellers below, and all the travellers could look up and see him. Soon, workmen brought in Blacknose's wooden tender and fastened it behind him. Then they attached 3 of his beautiful yellow coaches. They dusted and cleaned the coaches. They dusted and cleaned the little engine. They even polished his long black nose. Before long, people began leaving the bustling crowds below. They climbed the stairways or rode the station's large elevator to see Little Blacknose. Now 2 men stood beside him, studying him carefully. The younger man spoke first. "Well, here's a funny-looking piece of machinery." Oh, how Blacknose disliked him. The older man answered, "My boy, don't speak disrespectfully about the DeWitt Clinton. Where would the New York Central be today without him? Look at this station, the largest station in the largest city in the world. Think of the monster engines roaring in and out below us," the older man continued. "Those engines travel through 14 states and cross the country from coast to coast. They battle wind, rain, hurricanes, and blizzards. Nothing frightens them. Nothing stops them. But little DeWitt made all of it possible. He was the first. He showed the way for every engine that followed. A pioneer. That's what he is, a pioneer. And don't forget, my boy, he helped make your father's fortune." "A pioneer! I made it possible!" Little Blacknose felt as though he might burst with happiness. He looked proudly from his lofty gallery at the enormous station spread beneath him. His. All his. For he had helped make it possible. Through the years, Little Blacknose remained high in his honoured place inside the New York Central Station. His black nose stayed just as black, and his yellow coaches remained as bright and cheerful as they had been when they made the old roan horse so jealous. How Blacknose loved his visitors, all of them. He enjoyed the wise engineers who discussed his pipes and machinery. He loved the boys and girls who simply thought he looked sweet and funny. But Blacknose was happiest whenever he spotted a little girl with cornflower blue eyes among the crowd and heard her say, "Oh, I wish I could ride inside one of those darling yellow coaches." And so ends the true and honest story of Little Blacknose, the small engine with the long black nose who helped show the way for every great locomotive that followed. He began his life wondering what he was. He discovered that he was brave, hard-working, sometimes jealous, occasionally frightened, and truly one of a kind. And although newer engines grew larger, stronger, and faster, none could ever replace Little Blacknose as a pioneer. Thank you for listening to Little Blacknose, the story of a pioneer, written by Hildegarde Hoyt Swift. We hope you enjoyed travelling the shining rails with Little Blacknose. Until our next story, goodbye from 1, 2, 3, baby, you and me.